I'm taking a break from my normal routine where I normally review older films and am reviewing instead Beowulf from 2007. And the reason I'm doing that is because it is amazing. This film might actually be perfect.
I am Ripper, Tearer, Slasher. I am the teeth in the darkness, the challenge in the night. Mine is strength and lust and power. I am Beowulf!
Beowulf as a story has been around for a while. You're probably familiar. It's about 1,000 years old. It's written in Old English. It's like one of the oldest English works of literature ever. Although it's in Old English, so it's not like normal English, but it's still English, technically. And, it's kind of a superhero story. There's this dude who's super strong named Beowulf, and he fights one monster, and then he fights that monster's mother, and then he fights a dragon when he's old. And that's about it. And it's pretty good. It's considered pretty good, and it is pretty good. I've read parts of it. There's a great 1999 translation from Old English to regular English by the Irish poet Seamus Heaney. It's pretty respected. And it's considered, a precursor to a lot of fantasy. Like, a lot of our imagery of dragons comes from this, alongside Norse mythology. And it's kind of an early, prototypical, heroic epic. But this movie came out in 2007, and it is somehow like the best movie ever. It has one of the best teams ever behind it, and the execution, it's like absolutely amazing. It's like up there with the best stuff I've ever seen. The team is amazing. Robert Zemeckis, who directed all the Back to the Future movies, and directed Forrest Gump, and directed Castaway, and a lot of other greats. He's one of Spielberg's proteges. He's considered just, an absolute banger. Not all of his stuff is great, but a lot of it. He's one of the most entertaining, exciting, bang up awesome directors out there. And it's got a stellar cast. It's got Anthony freaking Hopkins. It's got John Malkovich. It's got Robin Wright, the Princess Bride herself. It's got Angelina Jolie somehow. It's got Mad-Eye Moody. It's got so much great talent that you've seen in a lot of things in it. And from a writing perspective, it's so good. It expands on the material. It takes kind of the basic ideas and ties them into a larger narrative. And it's amazing. It's amazing heroic fantasy is the word I would use. To me, it seems like a consequence of Gladiator coming out in 2000 and, transforming the industry and leading to a lot of sword and sandal and fantasy and mythology and medieval type films getting made. This seems like he kind of came out towards the end of that boom, 2007. But it's really good. It's like toe-to-toe as good as any of the best of that genre. It's really exciting, really compelling, really cool. And what's crazy about it to me that makes it super interesting is that I think it's aged really well in the sense that it's, in this present day, obviously the original has aged well because it's a book that's been around for 1,000 years. But this version of the story that came out about 20 years ago now also has aged really well because when it adapts this heroic myth, it ends up turning into, I think it's not unfair to call it kind of a dark take on what we might call toxic masculinity, which is crazy because, we didn't have that vocabulary as much 20 years ago. And also, that's not what you typically expect when you go see, a heroic fantasy. But that's what it is because it takes the idea of the Beowulf, the guy who, kills all the monsters, and the guy who, in the tradition of poems, is always boasting about how great he is, and turns that into a real person, and they're like, well, a guy who's boasting about how great he is all the time, maybe he would feel pressure to keep up appearances, and maybe what he said to other people was not always what he was doing when no one was around. And so it turns into this kind of tragedy that's still very cool about how his inability to be authentic ends up bringing about his downfall despite all of his other great qualities. The action is amazing. Some of the very coolest stuff you've ever seen ever. Like the stuff you'd see in the very coolest Marvel movies now, which have a very high action quotient and action pedigree behind them. And the writing is really good, and it feels like it's adapting the material but trying to update it in a modern context. And it's also very adult. Adult in the sense that there's, there's violence. It's, pretty R-rated violence. And there's sexuality, although not explicit sexuality, but, it's pretty adult. And it gets adult in its subject matter and how it talks about, lies and betrayal and dishonesty and how people will end up creating their own downfalls because they don't take the right path. And, it's kind of, it's adult in the depressing way, not in the exciting, gritty way. But that is a credit to it. It's part of what makes it work and what makes it convincing and spectacular. The music is great, the actors are great, the action is great. What's crazy about this is that it wasn't a huge success, but I can see some reasons why, frankly. The sword and sandal genre, even when it gets popular, is often pretty hit or miss, because it's really hard to make something like that that's financially successful. And often it's hard to make one that's critically successful as well. I can see why this one would maybe not get noticed despite all the talent behind it. And also, of course, this is a thing that anyone who sees a picture of it is going to talk about, is like, the CGI is different. And it is. And I think when I go online and see about this movie, what I often see is people saying, the CGI was kind of funny and they didn't seem like real people and it bothered me. But I don't know about everyone else, but I think this might be a generational thing, because it's never bothered me. I've seen a few films like this with this kind of quality of animation. Maybe it's just because I grew up in the 2000s, and so I grew up with PS2 and then PS3, cinematic graphics. But it didn't bother me. I'm used to it. And to me, I'm like, well, I can tell it's not real, but it doesn't seem so close to real that it's getting me confused or uncomfortable. But I can tell it's animation. It's it's being animation that just looks a bit more photorealistic. And I think in this case, it's a huge strength and boon to the film, because they use it to create all these things that you can't create so easily in live action. The action is so much more dynamic and exciting because they can do an animation, and so they can they can throw the actors around and stuff like that. That's harder to do. And it's just a spectacular viewing experience, and it helps kind of sell the element of the world, because you're like, well, this is like our world, but not quite like our world, because it's a made-up fantastic story. And I know I would say it's amongst the best in the genre, and despite it being animation, because of all the things I said, it still manages to feel really adult and feel like a real world. And it's just spectacular. I would recommend this to basically anyone who thinks they might like it even a little bit. I'd recommend it to, guys looking to just have a cool guys' night. It's going to blow your freaking minds. I'd recommend it to people who just want to have something that's going to make them think a little. It'll do that very well. I'd recommend it to, people who read a lot of books, who want to feel cultured in their popular entertainment. You're going to feel very cultured, but also you're going to be very entertained. I would recommend it to people who want to read a book but don't want to read it that badly, because watching this feels a lot like a book in presentation. Overall, it's spectacular. I didn't have to talk about it, but I watched it this weekend and it was so good. I was like, I have to talk about it. The world needs to know about this. It's spectacular. So yeah, not really a lot to this video except to just give a wholehearted endorsement of the film. Go watch it. Go tell your friends about it. Maybe don't watch it with your kids because it's very violent. But it's spectacular. It's going to be a banger. Tell your friends.